This is the Get Sellers Calling You Marketing podcast for real estate agents, and I'm Beatty Carmichael. To learn how to generate more listings from past clients in sphere of influence, geographic farming, and commercial investment property, visit our website at getsellerscallingyou.com. And now let's begin our next session of Get Sellers Calling You.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm so glad you've joined us. For those of you who don't remember me, my name is Penny, and welcome. Welcome to this next session of Get Sellers Calling You with Beatty Carmichael. Beatty is the CEO of Master Grabber, the creator of Agent Dominator, and one of the top marketing experts in the real estate field. Beatty, I'm super excited. I know you always have something great for us today. What are we going to be discussing today?
Well, today we're back on another radical faith topic, which means that this has nothing to do with real estate marketing and everything to do with living boldly as a Christian. So if you're not interested in that topic, feel free to turn this episode off and wait for the next one. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. Great.
Super excited.
Yes. And so in continuation from the last radical faith call, we're on a short series, When Bad Things Happen, Is It God's Will? And today we're going to be talking part 2. Kind of the subtopic on this is going through dark times. Have you ever gone through dark times in your Christian life, Penny?
Yes.
Okay.
Too many that I want to remember, actually.
Yeah, I think it's part of the process that the Lord uses, both for us and for accomplishing His will. And a lot of times it's hard to really discern what's going on. So I want to go back to kind of the core question that I asked you last time. You said that God is sovereign and that He is in control. So the question is, if God is sovereign and in control, then does that mean that everything that happens is His will? And do we blame Him for it, right? So that's one of those questions that we all wrestle with. And we talked about there are basically 4 things that could be going on. Number 1, when bad things happen, we really have to understand first what is bad, okay? Bad is bad if its source is evil and the outcome is evil, right? And that can happen. And I think a lot of the real heartaches that we go through in life may actually have its roots there. We're going to talk about that on the next session. Then, last session, we talked about how God directs our steps. And we have the freedom, the free will, to use your terminology, to disregard His direction and place our foot down where we want to instead of where He wants to. And when that happens, it says that we stumble. And so sometimes when bad things happen, it could simply be a consequence of us simply not following the Lord's direction. Okay? And so I would call that not bad, but just consequence and probably inconvenient more than anything else. Another thing that happens when things are bad is they're actually directed by God because we have sinned and He's bringing discipline into our life. So it feels bad, but the outcome is good. And then the last thing that happens when things feel bad is when the source is the Lord, and it's all for our good. And I mean, even the discipline is for our good, but in this case, it's all for our destiny of where the Lord is leading us. So it feels bad, it seems dark, but if we could see from God's perspective, it's really an amazing journey. And that's what I want to talk about today. So are we ready?
Well, yes, this is going to be great.
Okay, so we're going to, if we can wrap it all in quickly, we're going to talk about 2 stories, 2 people, actually more than 2 people, but the stories are known by the people. The story of Joseph and the story of Esther. And I'm assuming you know both of those stories, right?
Yes, great stories, yeah.
All right, so let's see how well you know it. No, I'm teasing. I was going to ask my minutiae details. How old was Joseph when he went out to find his brothers in the field? I'd be surprised if you know that answer.
I want to say 16 or 17.
Yeah, good, 17. So that's going to tie into this. So let me give you just a little background, and I'm going to just kind of read from the Bible and skip around a lot. Normally, I'd let you read, but this is kind of story form, so I want to tie it together. So this starts in Genesis 37, and for the most part, if you don't recognize some of this verbiage, it's coming from the Living Bible, which makes things sometimes a little bit easier. And it starts like this. Joseph's brothers, of course, noticed their father's partiality and consequently hated Joseph. Okay? They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night, Joseph had a dream and promptly reported the details to his brothers, causing even deeper hatred. Listen to this, he announced. We were out in the field binding sheaves, and my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves all gathered around me and bowed low before it. So the brothers said, so you want to be our king, do you? And they hated him both for the dream and his cocky attitude. So here's a question for you. Did Joseph, do you think, grow up in a loving family?
Yes. Yeah.
With his brothers hating him the whole time?
No.
Is that a loving family?
No.
No, okay. So his father loved him, yes, but his brothers hated him. It says 3 times that they hated him. They hated him. They hated him. So can you imagine living in an environment where your closest relatives are all hating you?
I cannot.
Would you call that good or bad?
Bad.
Yeah, I would think so too. So then we read a little bit further. So now, Joseph is 17 years old. His father, Israel, okay, so just to give you the genealogy, you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And Israel had 12 sons. Those are the 12 tribes of Israel. And son number 11, if I'm correct, is Joseph, okay? And so he sends Joseph out into the fields to find all of his other sons, the other 10 brothers at that time, to his 10 older brothers, and just check on what's going on. So this is where we pick up, and it says, but when they saw him coming, recognizing him in the distance, they decided to kill him. Okay? Here we have that loving family. Again, let's kill our brother. Here comes that master dreamer, they exclaim. So come on, let's kill him and toss him into a well and tell Father that a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what will become of all of his dreams. So they're still jealous of what God has given him as a dream. So it says when Joseph got there, they pulled off his brightly colored robe. Okay, so his father had given him a robe of righteousness. Robes are a status symbol, and this one was a greater status symbol because it had lots of bright colors. And so it says that they threw off his robe and threw him into an empty well. And then they see a bunch of traders come by. And so when the traders came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the well and sold him into to the traders for 20 pieces of silver. And they took him to Egypt. Now, can you imagine at this moment Joseph being thrown into the well by his brothers, being rough-handled, and then being yanked up and sold into slavery for only 20 pieces of silver? What do you think's going on in Joseph's mind at that point?
He's got to feel completely rejected, unloved, scared.
Yeah.
So many things.
Did he feel like he deserved any of this?
No.
Do you think he was questioning God?
Yes.
Absolutely. We always question God because we don't trust him. Do you think if he trusted God as Moses trusted God as they were going through the wilderness, do you think if he trusted God at that level that he would be questioning God quite so much?
Probably not.
No. So what I find is we question God the most when we don't really trust him. In other words, when we keep our eyes on ourselves and not on the Lord and his word, that's usually when we question what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So then we pick up. This is now in Genesis 39. So Joseph arrives in Egypt. He's sold to Potiphar, a member of Pharaoh's staff. Okay? Potiphar later puts him in charge of all of his affairs. And then one day, Potiphar's wife begins making eyes at Joseph and suggests that he come and sleep with her. And what does Joseph do? You remember?
He says no.
That's right. He says no. He says, my master trusts me with everything in the entire household. He has held nothing back from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing as this? It would be a great sin against God. So do you think Joseph loves the Lord?
Yes.
Do you think he's following the Lord the best he can?
I do.
Yeah. Okay. And now this woman's coming after him. Is Joseph acting properly and faithfully?
He is, yeah.
And what happens? You remember?
I think she keeps pushing, like she keeps trying to seduce him and really try to get him to go along with what she wants. And he keeps saying no, and she gets upset.
That's right. So
let's read that. I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, hopefully most of the folks on the listening to this probably have some recollection of Joseph, but let's read into it. So, then one day as he was in the house and no one else was around at the time, she came and grabbed him by the sleeve, demanding, "Sleep with me." He tore himself away, but as he did, his jacket or his robe slipped off, and she was left holding it as he fled from the house. When she saw that she had it and he had fled, she began screaming. And when the other men around the place came running in, she was crying hysterically. "My husband had to bring in this Hebrew slave to insult us," she sobbed. "He tried to rape me, but when I screamed, he ran and forgot to take his jacket." So do you think Joseph is being wrongly accused?
Yes, totally.
Is this good or bad?
Bad.
Yeah, so what's happening? It's just one bad event after another, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
His brothers hate him. They try to kill him. They throw him into a well. Then they sell him into slavery. And then he's doing well. He's acting righteously before God. His master puts him in control of everything. Now he gets slammed again. And it gets even worse. So it says that when her husband came home that night, she told him her story. "That Hebrew slave that you've had around here tried to rape me." And when he heard it, he was furious, and he threw Joseph into prison, down into the dungeon. How do you think Joseph is feeling right now?
Worse.
Yeah. Do you think he's going, "Oh, Lord, thank you. I'm so excited. I'm right in the center of your will"?
No. I think he probably had a few choice words.
Probably so. Let me ask you, was he right in the center of God's will?
Ooh, that's a trick question. Yes, he was, because I know the outcome of the story.
That's right. That's right. So this is a key. When we know the outcome, we can now piece it all together. Going through it, we have to trust the Father's heart.
Yeah.
And not worry. Okay? Now, we always worry, but the more we trust the Father's heart, the more we can handle any of these quote-unquote dark times that come our way, because we know who's in control. So now, we're in Genesis 40. Sometime later, it happened that the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, became angry with his chief baker and his chief butler. So he throws them into the prison where Joseph is. And then one night, each of them have a dream. And Joseph interprets both of those dreams. And the dreams, his interpretation actually comes true. Pharaoh decides to hold a party. He pulls both the baker and the butler out. He puts the butler back into position, and he kills the baker, just as Joseph said was going to happen. And Joseph said, "Hey, butler, when you get out, remember me. Tell Pharaoh about me. I've done nothing to be here. I've done nothing against my own people to have been sold into slavery. I've done nothing wrong. Please tell him." And what did the butler do?
He remembered. I think if I remember right, I don't want to give away too much, but I think he tells Pharaoh, I know somebody that can interpret dreams.
Yeah, okay, so watch this. This is cool. So now we're in Genesis 41. One night, 2 years later. Okay, it was 2 years later. Joseph still is in dark times, in the dungeon, no freedom, no light, nothing but grunge, okay? 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed 2 dreams. No one could interpret them. Then the butler remembers Joseph at that point and says, I totally forgot. Some time ago, when you were angry with a couple of us and put me and the chief baker in jail, the baker and I each had a dream one night. We told the dreams to a young Hebrew who was a slave of the captain there, and he told us what our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he said. I was restored to my position, and the baker was executed. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once. Okay? Now, is this good or bad?
This is good if he's getting called out of prison.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It sure looks like good, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see the Lord's hand starting to move right now on this?
For sure, yeah.
Okay. Now, to put this in perspective, this is 11 years after Joseph has been sold into slavery. He's now 28 years old.
Wow.
Okay. From 17 to 28, he's been a slave. So then Joseph interprets the dreams, tells Pharaoh that both dreams are saying the same thing, that there's going to be 7 years of great abundance and then 7 years of the most severe famine that's going to be so severe you won't even remember how abundant it is. And then Pharaoh talks to his advisor and said, well, we need to put someone in charge to manage all this. Who do we do? And so now I'm going to pick up and I'm going to read, this is Genesis 41, starting in 39. And then it says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. In other words, Pharaoh now puts him in second in control of all of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and then put on Joseph's hand. Here's the significance. The signet ring means that Joseph can do anything in the king's name. By the way, as Christians, we've been given the Lord's signet ring. Okay? Now there's some deep implications on how effectively we end up using that, but that's another story. So he takes the signet ring, puts it in Joseph's hand, and then during the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and then the 7 years of plenty came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. So here's kind of the summary I want to go through with all this. The Lord is directing all of these events in Joseph's lives. Would you agree?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So Joseph was a man after God's own heart, and even in his slavery and imprisonment, we know that he sought the Lord because he always tried to do what was honorable, and the Lord always put him in charge of, blessed everything that was going on. So we see the Lord's hand upon Joseph even in the dark times. Did you, in your dark times, have you ever seen the Lord's hand kind of still working with you and through you during those tough times?
Yes, yeah. Sometimes it's hard to see. You know, your natural eyes tend to focus on the dark, but for sure, God was there.
That's right. And I've seen the same thing over and over again. And so back with Joseph, because he was faithful in the small things, as he was coming through, we'll call this his wilderness experience, okay? As he was coming through this wilderness, then the Lord put him in charge of much. Just as what Jesus says, because you have been faithful in a little, now be in charge of 10 cities, as he's the parable with the minas. But here's the key. From Joseph's perspective, as he's going through it, each event merely seemed to have a natural cause and effect. His brothers hated him. He has a dream. They hated him more. He goes and they decide to kill him. They throw him in a well. Then they say, let's sell him. Every single thing, there's a cause and effect that Joseph is putting together. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So from his perspective, it was just one bad event after another. I'm sure he felt bitter. I'm sure he questioned God on what was happening. And yet, here's the thing. The Lord is directing every step of his. So if you remember last session, passage after passage after passage, the Lord is telling us. He guides our step. He directs our step. He charts our path. He even tells us where to stop and rest. And what we find here is every step is guided and directed by the Lord. And finally, Joseph comes to that same realization once his brothers come and provides food, okay? Because Joseph said, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Joseph finally figured out what was going on later. He figured out it was his destiny that the Lord was working on. And so we see the Lord guiding all of this. Let's see. Let me think a couple other thoughts on this before we shift to some topics. So, so here's the question. When bad things happen, does God cause it? We can obviously look at this life of Joseph, all these things that were seemingly bad. Here's the question. Did God cause all those events to happen?
No.
No. Then what happened?
He used them.
Yeah.
He used them for, yeah.
Did he know they were going to happen?
Yes.
All right.
He knows all things.
He knows all things. And he used them. So sometimes we find that God uses the bad that's in the world to propel us to the good destiny that he has for us. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
Think about Jesus. Satan was going to try everything he could to stop Jesus. Do you think God knew that?
Oh, for sure.
And do you think everything that Satan did to stop Jesus actually played in God's hand to fulfill Jesus' destiny?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Do you think God is a respecter of persons?
I think he treats us all the same. I think he loves us all the same.
Yeah, Paul says God is no respecter of persons, right?
Yeah.
So if he
I
treats
think
us all
I'm
the
his
same,
favorite.
that's right.
I'm his favorite.
We're
but
all
you're
his
favorite too.
That's right. We're all his favorite. So here's the thing. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he does for one, he does for all, because he respects no one greater than someone else.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it says, because faith was reckoned, righteousness was reckoned to Abraham because of his faith. So is righteousness reckoned to us because of our faith. In other words, God sets a precedent. What he does for one, he does for all. And what we find here with Joseph, the Lord is leveraging all of these evil things that are going on that God knows ahead of time. But he uses those almost like the picture I'm getting is sort of like that. Have you ever played a pinball machine? You swat the ball, it hits a thing, it goes somewhere else, it bounces around, okay? It's almost like God knows every little post out there and swats the ball in just the right direction to hit one post and another post, and the next post pushes the ball a little bit further, and it guides it all the way to home run, okay, into the goalpost. And that's kind of what's going here. So there is a possibility that God caused some of this to happen. Do you think God caused Israel to love Joseph more than the other brothers?
Oh, that's a tough question. No. And the only reason I say no, that God doesn't cause bad, is because God is good.
Right.
There's
No, hold on.
Okay.
I'm not asking. Is Israel loving Joseph more than the other brothers, good or bad?
Bad.
God says, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Is that good or bad?
It's bad for Esau.
But is God good?
Yes.
Okay. So what is good for God, can it also be good for man?
Yes.
So if God caused Israel to love Joseph more than the other brothers, is that good or bad?
That's good. In the
Yeah,
eyes
I think
of God.
it is. Yeah. He's not causing Israel to hate the other brothers, but just to love Joseph more. Do you think God caused Israel to make Joseph a bright multicolored jacket?
Yeah.
Do you think God knew that would create jealousy and hatred among the brothers?
Yes.
Do you think God caused Joseph to have those dreams?
I do.
Do you think he knew that those dreams would cause jealousy and hatred among the brothers?
Yes.
Okay, so here's what we have. We see God causing a lot of events that have the repercussions of evil responding that God uses to push Joseph toward his destiny. Do you think that's possible that he's doing the same thing in our lives at times as well? Yeah. Okay. Is this kind of cool?
Yes, very cool. I love it.
All right. So so we pick up a lot of things, and just some real interesting things. Let's see, just trying to catch up on where I am on my notes. When bad things happen to us, we must first try to decide, are they truly bad, or are they simply not what we desire? Is it truly bad that the brothers hated Joseph? Is it truly bad that they wanted to kill him? Is it truly bad that they sold him into slavery? Are all these things truly bad? Or ultimately, are they just simply not what we desire, but they happen to be the best thing for us because they push us where the Lord is directing us? And we can't tell that as we go through, okay? Our perspective at the moment, we can't grasp God's big picture. It's only after a period of time that we can look backwards and see. And for Joseph, it took 22 years before he understood that all these bad things that had happened to him were actually God's hand leading him. Let me ask you a question. 22 years later, do you think if he had the perspective of where he was 22 years as he was going through those processes, do you think his heart toward God would have been different?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Do you think his
100%,
attitude?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what can we pull out of this? What we can really pull out, we got to trust the Lord to be a faithful Father. When we know that we are truly seeking the Lord, honoring Him, really following Him, trying to do our best. Yeah, we stumble, but when bad things happen, things that we consider bad, we have to trust the heart of our Father. Like I mentioned last time, when you can't see what the Lord's hand is doing, you have to trust His heart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So now I want to shift stories and talk about Esther, because here's what's so cool. The Lord tells the same story with the same message over and over and over again all throughout Scripture, because He's constantly revealing who He is. And it's our job to pull out of those Scriptures the understanding of who He is. And so I want to walk through another story that has some really neat implications, very similar. So this is the story of Esther. Okay, trivia question. What is Esther's real name?
Oh, I probably can't pronounce it. Let me think.
It's like Hadassah or Hadassah. Yes, something like that.
Something like that. Hadassah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just
yeah.
Just testing your trivia. No big deal on that. Okay, so let me kind of give you the background. I want to lay out the storyline of Esther. So Jerusalem has been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. All of the people have been taken out in exile. This is the time of Daniel. Okay, he was taken as captives, and a guy named Mordecai and Esther are gone as well. Then Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is overtaken by a guy named King Ahasuerus, who's king of the Persian and the Medes, or something like that, and he's having a feast and throwing a great big party. He calls the queen in to show her off in front of all of his guests. She refuses. He gets upset. He banishes her. Then he's upset because now he doesn't have a queen. So they say, well, let's go throughout all your kingdom and get the most beautiful virgins that are out there, and we'll bring them into your harem, and you get to choose. Okay, so that's kind of the storyline. So now we come to Susa, the capital, where he is. This is where Esther is living with her uncle, because Esther is an orphan. Chances are her mother and father were killed during the Babylonian captivity. We don't know that for certain, but that would make sense. And then she's living there peacefully with Mordecai, her uncle, and now she's forcefully taken from him to be thrown into the king's harem. Is that good or bad?
That's bad.
Yeah, I would think so.
Taken away from her family.
Yep, the only family she's got. So then she becomes king. Later, Mordecai gets a job working for the king, as he sits at the king's gate. Okay, and while he's at his job, he overhears a plot from two people that are upset with the king, and they want to kill the king. All right. Do you hear that noise in the background? Is that problematic?
No,
you don't?
I don't.
Okay, perfect. Great. So I'm out on my deck when I do this, and I just want to make sure you don't hear the background noise. So Mordecai reports this plot to the queen, who then takes it to the king. The king investigates, kills those two people. The king is saved. Okay? So then later, the king appoints a guy named Haman as prime minister, essentially, to run the country. And Haman is an evil man, and everyone is supposed to bow down and basically worship him as he comes by. And so every time he comes by Mordecai as he goes to the king's gate, what do you think Mordecai does as a Jew?
He does not. He does
not
bow down.
That's right. So you have an evil, prideful man. Everyone's bowing down except this one man who stays standing. What do you think think's going on in Haman's heart at that point?
Why are you not bowing down to me?
That's
angry.
Right. He gets real angry, okay? And so he finds out that Mordecai doesn't bow because he's a Jew. So now Mordecai hates all the Jews. So he decides, I'm going to just get rid of all of them. So he goes to the king and says, I'll pay you 10,000 talents of silver. That's a huge amount. So Haman is really rich. He said, I'll pay you 10,000 talents of silver if you let me write a decree to kill all of the Jews because they're bad for your kingdom. The king says, hey, that's good. All right, I'll do that. So he lets the king lets Haman do that. So then Haman writes a decree and that sends it out through all of the province. This is basically all of the world at that time, and says, on this date, in about 12 months, every person can rise up against all the Jews, kill every Jew, every man, woman, and child. And whoever you kill, you can plunder everything they have. So now all the Jews are scared to death. Certain death is marked out, and they're powerless to stop it. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Is this bad?
Yes. Oh, my
goodness.
Yeah.
Is this rooted in evil? Yeah. Do you think it might be even Satan trying to get rid of the Jewish race?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So then Mordecai comes to Esther. She goes to the king and wants to plead for help. And so she's going to do this through 2 lunch sessions. So she says, King, will you come to lunch with me today? And will you bring Haman? Now, this is real interesting. The fact that she comes before the king, she puts her life on the line. So the king realizes something really important. She has something really important to ask, or she would not have risked her life. Okay? So he says, yes, I'll be there. He grabs Haman. They go have lunch. He says, what do you want? She says, I want you to come tomorrow to another banquet, and then I'll make my request known. So then Haman goes home right after that, and he's all excited. He calls his friends. He tells his wife and his friends how great he is, how powerful he is, and even the queen invited me to a private lunch with the king. And then he says, this is his hatred coming up, and yet none of this is worth anything as long as I see Mordecai alive. So now his wife says, well, look, you got the king's favor. You're powerful. Why don't you build a gallows tomorrow morning? Go ask the king if you can hang Mordecai on the gallows before lunch, and then you can go to lunch with the king and the queen and just have a wonderful time. So can't you imagine Haman all excited, giddy that night, saying, oh, finally, I'm going to kill Mordecai tomorrow. You see this thing going on? So now watch God's humor, okay? So Mordecai is about to be killed. His runway of options is about out. He doesn't know it, but in probably 10 hours, he's going to be dead on that gallows, okay? There's nothing he can do to escape. You get the picture of this?
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a position you felt like there's nothing you can do to fix the problem? You are doomed?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So, but God has a sense of humor. God is in control. And what happens that night with the king? Do you remember?
I feel like somehow Esther says something that kind of like traps Haman.
Almost. Yeah, so that happens in a moment. So that night, while Haman is all giddy and probably can't sleep, the king can't sleep. Do you think it might have been providentially God keeping the king awake?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the king says, someone read me a book. I know. Read me the book of all the good deeds in my kingdom. So they pull out this book and they start reading all night long. And then they come to the story of Mordecai, how he reports this plot by his two employees to kill the king. And 2 employees were killed, and the king was saved. And and that's where we now pick up in Esther 6. So I'm now going to start reading from here. So that's the background. So now let me start reading what the scripture says. So the king says, what reward did we ever give Mordecai for this? And his courtiers replied, nothing. Well, who's on duty in the outer court? The king inquired. Okay, so this is early morning. He's still in bed. They're still reading. So you can get them. This is really early in the morning. And now as it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court to ask the king to hang Mordecai. Okay? He's so excited. He gets up early, and that's the first thing on his mind. So the courtiers replied, Haman is out there. The king said, oh, great, bring him in. So Haman comes in. Now he's coming into the king's private chamber. Okay? And the king says to him, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? And what do you think Haman is thinking to himself?
He's going to honor me. It's going to be me.
That's right. The scripture says, well, whom would he want to honor more than me? Pride comes before the fall, right? So he replies, so Haman says, well, bring out some of the royal robes that the king himself has worn, and the king's own horse, and the royal crown, and instruct one of the king's most noble princes to robe the man and lead him through the streets on the king's own horse, shouting, this is the way the king honors those who truly please him. Man, Haman wants grandeur. Can you see this? All the pride and praise from all the people out there?
Yes, yes.
Isn't God wonderful? So the king says, "Excellent. Hurry and take these robes and my horse and do just as you said to Mordecai the Jew who works at the chancellery. Follow every detail you suggested." What do you think's going on right then in Haman's heart?
Oh, I just cannot. I mean, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall. I'm sure his face fell to the floor, and
Yes.
just can you imagine? Can you imagine the embarrassment even that he probably felt?
That's right. And here's something I want you to recognize. All of this is happening, and Mordecai doesn't have a clue. So often, God is doing all kinds of things behind the scene, and we don't even have a clue.
Yeah.
And yet, God is in control. So we pick back up. So Haman takes the robes and puts them on Mordecai. I can just imagine, Mordecai, come here. I want to robe you. I'm going to set this crown on you. And I can just imagine what Mordecai is doing. He's going, "Yep, the Lord's about to save us."
That's so awesome.
So he puts the robes on Mordecai, mounts him on the king's own steed, and leads him through the streets of the city, shouting, "This is the way the king honors those who delights in him." And then afterwards, Mordecai goes back to his job, and Haman hurries home, utterly humiliated.
Mm-hmm.
So now he's sulking. So keep in mind, this is the morning of the second feast with the queen. So later that day, just a couple hours later, as he's mourning and he's complaining, and his wife is saying, "Well, if Mordecai is a Jew, your plans are going to completely fail now." He still doesn't know the queen is a Jew. So then the king's men come to get Haman to bring him to lunch, and they're at lunch, and I can just imagine that Haman is all sulking and morose during this banquet, and the king asks again to Esther, "What can I do for you?" And we pick back up. This is Esther 7. And at last Queen Esther replied, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it please your majesty, save my life and the lives of my people. For I and my people have been sold to those who will destroy us. We are doomed to destruction and slaughter. If we were only to be sold as slaves, perhaps I could remain quiet, even though then there would be incalculable damage to the king that no amount of money could begin to cover." So she hits right on. There's money that's been paid on this, and doesn't matter how much has been paid. Even if we're just sold in slavery, this is going to destroy the king. Okay? And then the king replies, "What are you talking about? And who would touch you?" Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our enemy." Then Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. The king jumped to his feet and went out of the palace garden as Haman stood up to plead for his life to Queen Esther, for he knew that he was doomed. You know, this happens so frequently. All is at loss, and the enemy that's attacking us, we think they're about to win, and yet God has everything in his hands, and in just a moment, boom, it's all gone. So in despair, Haman falls upon the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king returned from the palace garden. "Will he even rape the queen right here in the palace before my eyes?" the king roared. And instantly, the death veil, that hood, was placed over Haman's face. And then one of the king's aides says, "Sir, Haman has just ordered a 75-foot gallows constructed to hang Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. It stands in Haman's courtyard. Hang Haman on it," the king ordered. So that's the end of Haman. Then the king gives Mordecai Haman's position, gives Esther all of Haman's possessions, and then Mordecai writes a decree that the Jews can not only defend themselves on that date, this is now about 10 months to go, but they can also kill every one of their enemies who hates them. And so on that day, when it comes, the Israelites destroyed 75,000 of their staunchest enemies. So that's the story of Esther. Isn't that pretty cool?
That's amazing.
All right, so now I want to wrap this up, and I want to give some really cool takeaways out of all this, because I think this is really kind of what's cool with this. So the central thought on all of this that hits me as I've gone through it is, do you think the Lord could have prevented Haman from coming to power?
Could have, yes.
Yeah. If he had prevented Haman from coming to power, would that have protected his people? And they would never have been in peril.
Mhm. Yeah, unless someone else came and did that. But yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But God chose not to do that.
Yeah.
Think about it. God allowed his people to go through tough times so he can deliver them. And not only deliver them, but give them greater blessings. I think someone said the darker the times you go through, the greater the blessings on the other end. Okay?
Mhm.
And so what we have to realize is, because the Lord directs those events that have a major impact in our lives in accomplishing his will, then as we go through these events, even though it's scary, our honest response should be to be at peace, knowing that the Lord is in control, and that all of these things, if we're in God's will, okay, if we're doing our best to follow his guidance, okay, as we talked about last time, then whatever happens, we should be at peace and content, knowing that God is guiding everything that's going on for some reason, for his glory and for our destiny of where we're to be used. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And yet, how often do we get our eyes off the Lord and back on ourselves, and we start to get afraid and question the Lord? So, so as Haman comes to power as prime minister, that the Lord allows him to do, he's choosing to destroy all of the Jews. But watch this. Long before he ever came to power, God put Queen Esther in position to deliver his people. God is playing this big game of chess, and he knows exactly what's going on, and he's positioning the pieces already. But watch this. See, God could have prevented Haman from coming to power. Instead, he chose to show his own power and sovereignty by delivering their people once they were in peril. And not only that, though, here's kind of the other key, is because Haman came to power, because all these events came through, because all of the Jews were terrified and scared to death for their life, then through that process, God delivered the Jews even more. He didn't just deliver the Jews from Haman and the threat of being killed. He delivered the Jews from all of their enemies at that time, because they killed all 75,000 of them. So it was a greater blessing for them to have come through that process, because they ended up in a stronger, safer, more secure position. Does that make sense? So it seems that God allows us to go through tough times, not only so he can get the glory of delivering us, but that he can bless us more through that. And I think there are 5 takeaways that I get from this. First, the Lord is in control of all things in the big scheme of things, okay? He doesn't control Haman. He doesn't control the evil, but he is in control. He has his overriding control of everything that goes on. That's the first thing we can get from this. The second thing we can get is that he's coordinating the activities long before their purpose is known. Think about this. So first, he coordinates the activity to get rid of Queen Vashti. I think that's her name. And then that forces King Ahasuerus to say, I need another queen. Who do I get? They rip Esther out of her home. They thought that was bad. And God is doing all that to position her in a position of power. But not only that, Mordecai then gets a job with the king, and he overhears this plot, and he reports it. That plot and Mordecai overhearing it has a key role to play in this. By the way, do you know how long it was from the time of that plot to the time that the king read back to the Chronicles and said, have we honored this person for saving the king?
I feel like it was over a year, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, it was. It was about 5 years. So watch this.
Wow.
One seemingly insignificant thing, he just happens to overhear this plot and reports it. 5 years later is the key to saving the entire nation of the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
Then, so God is coordinating a lot of things that we don't even see long before they ever come to fruition. The third thing we can take out of this is the Lord allows us to face complete loss, complete destruction, or as I call it, running off the cliff. It seems like we're just about to run off that cliff, and there's nothing we can do to prevent it. He allows us to get into that position, for us to be scared to death, but rely and trust on him. In fact, one of the things Mordecai said to Esther, she said, I can't go before the king because I could be killed. And watch Mordecai's faith in the Lord. He said, well, Esther, who knows if maybe you haven't been put in as queen for a time such as this to save our people, but if you don't do it, be assured that the Lord will save us, but it'll be through some other means.
Mm-hmm.
So Mordecai has this great faith in the Lord, great worry of what's going on, but great faith as well that the Lord's going to take care of it. And that's what happens. The Lord allows us to go to the edge, to go, right to the edge of that cliff. Then fourth, he always intervenes. He always protects his loved ones from destruction. He allows them to get to the edge, but he won't allow them to go over the edge. And fifth, which I think is pretty cool, is during that process and because of that process, he also, as a bonus, he blesses us even more. With not only with the Jews and destroying all of their enemies, but Mordecai is taken from just a lowly employee to prime minister of the entire country. So you just see God's hand in all of this. And as I go through this, I'm encouraged that he's always in control. He's coordinating all these events in my life and in your life that we don't understand, that we get concerned about, that we're afraid of sometimes. He allows us to head straight for the cliff, and we feel that we have no control in the matter because ultimately we really don't. We are moving down. If you recall one of the sessions we did earlier about God's timing versus man's timing, we're in that little pipe. You're going down that raging river, and you can't stop it. It is moving, and you're just going along with it. So there are things that we can't stop. We see this cliff. We're about to go over, and we seem to be powerless. And then the Lord comes in, and here's how he saves us. He saves us through a miraculous set of events. We may see them as circumstantial. When we see God's hand moving miraculously in the natural, we call it providential. Providential circumstances. But make no false assumption. It is the Lord's hand guiding and directing all of it directly for our care, directly for his will, directly for where he wants to lead us. And this is tying back into the last one. This is where it says, the Lord will get us to his destiny for us. And it says, even if I have to put a bit in your mouth and force you that direction, you will go where I am sending you. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that's great. And I was just thinking about even with Joseph, God used all those things to set Joseph up. He was before he was just a shepherd boy, basically, just a son that took, helped on the farm, and then look at where he ended up, second only in command under the Pharaoh.
Well, even in my own life, I'll tell you a story. I don't tell this much, but I got involved with Amway as a freshman in college. Do you know what Amway is?
Yes, yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's a network marketing company, pyramid company as people call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I come from a well-to-do medical family, and we had a great lifestyle growing up. My dad did very well financially and faithful before the Lord. But in freshman year of college, I get hooked into Amway. I get hooked into the approach of, oh my gosh, you're going to be rich. I thought literally that I was going to graduate college as a millionaire. So I was, yeah, right. But that's kind of what they told. I apologize. Hold one moment. You can probably hear that helicopter back there. It is kind of loud. Can you still hear me over the helicopter?
I can, yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. So I was about to quit college because I knew I didn't need it. My parents wisely told me just finish it. So I did, but I changed my degree and just had a great time in college and studying. So I get out of college, and then I find out I'm not making a bunch of money. In fact, I have to go home and live with my parents. And all my friends who got a regular degree, they're getting all these nice, cushiony jobs, and they're buying homes, and woe is me. And every time I see a friend drive by in a Mercedes or a BMW or, I was driving an old jalopy, my comment was, there but for me go I. And after a number of years of that, I really thought I'd screwed up my life. That pivotal point of my life, and everything was screwed up. I went from, job to job, trying to earn money here and there. Nothing was happening. By 10 years, 12, 13 years later, I was still broke, okay? I found myself unemployed. We had a small house, and we've been faithful to the Lord all the time, but nothing was going on. And then the Lord blessed us with this business that I started. And do you know what that business was?
I don't. Tell me.
It was selling. So during this time, I started to really learn about marketing, started to really consume it, tried a couple businesses with a friend of mine. They never really amounted to much, but we honed a lot of marketing talent. And we developed a product that really was great in generating leads. And so the Lord blessed me with just a little inkling of a business, and my first customer base was network marketers. And then we started to take all the stuff that I learned in Amway, the attitude, the go-get-it, all this stuff, and we applied it in business. And 2.5 years later, we were making $100,000 a month in profits.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? And I look back and I think, if it hadn't been for the Lord directing me into Amway, I would never be in business today. But during the time, I really thought I made a bad mistake. And I think all of us can probably look backwards and see the Lord's hand guiding them. And kind of on that same topic, I want to share one other thing. I was at church one day, and a man was asking me how my business was. And I told him, you mean in the natural or in the spiritual, right? I shared that, in the natural, it's like running full speed. The engine is running, the drive shaft is running, the wheels are spinning, but we're going nowhere because we're stuck in the mud. Because at that time, it felt like we have this big elephant standing in front of us, keeping from moving. But I told him, in the spiritual, God has told me that we're going through wilderness time. Once I get through the wilderness, he's going to move that elephant out of the way, and we're going to then just take off. And the man said, well, he has a brother and or a friend or someone like that who'd gone through some dark times in his business as well. I told him, no, we're not in dark times. I've been in dark times in my business, but now is not one of them. I said, you're only in dark times when you get your eyes off the Lord and put them on the natural. When you become afraid, that's when it's dark. But when you keep your eyes on the Lord, it's always bright. And then I was sharing the example of Peter walking on the water. So when we go through these times in our lives, it's important that we don't keep our eyes on the natural, because we become afraid. We start to question God. We put our eyes on the Lord, and that's where we have our trust. That's where we have our confidence.
For sure, yes.
So any other comments? We got to wrap up, but any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, just for me, trying to keep my focus on knowing that all the little things, like you just said, all those little things that I think might be ruining me or a bad decision or gosh, I shouldn't have gone that way or whatever, the Lord still uses it all in His promises to take care of us as His children.
Yes. And I would go one step further. If we're faithful before Him, and we can honestly look at our life and say, there is no sin in my life. I mean, no, focus of sin in my life. Obviously, we all sin. But there's no sin in our life. Then we can know that we're in the center of wherever He has us, and therefore not only know that those bad things, the Lord can bring something good out of it, but He's using those bad things to bounce us like that pinball machine, the next step down the path of where He's leading us. It's all part of His plan.
Yeah, to become fully mature.
Yes.
So good.
He matures us, and He puts us where He wants us to be used in His kingdom, to build His temple. And, it's really cool, really cool.
That's
all right.
Awesome. Well, Beatty, I think we're about out of time. We probably need to wrap it up. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your expertise and just the diligence that you put into studying the Word and teaching it to our listeners and myself as well. This was a great call, and I'm excited about our next one.
I am too. We'll be talking on part 3.
Sounds good. I guess we'll see everybody then.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it so you never miss another episode. Also, if you want an easy way to grow your business, check out Agent Dominator. We guarantee listings and sales from past clients in sphere of influence, geographic farming, and commercial investment properties. If you don't get the sales we promise, we'll give your money back. Learn more on our website at getsellerscallingyou.com and select Agent Dominator from the menu. Thanks for listening to the Get Sellers Calling You podcast, and have a great day.